Welcome to Huntingdon, a beautiful historic market town located in the heart of Cambridgeshire, best known as the birthplace of none other than Oliver Cromwell, once the Lord Protector of England. But there's plenty more to this riveting town too, and while we will visit local landmarks, including the place where Cromwell went to school, and a hotel where his rival, King Charles I, once stayed in Huntingdon, we'll also get to know the stories of a wealth of intriguing local landmarks, from beautiful, centuries-old churches to an array of historic local pubs, and the captivating earthwork remains of the medieval Huntingdon Castle. While we also won't forget to mention the tale of Huntingdon's legendary rivalry with its twin town of Godmanchester, located just a few dozen feet away on the other side of the gorgeous River Great Ouse. All of that is to come over the course of a pleasant 20-minute walk about town, but we begin in the very heart of Huntingdon on Market Hill, the town's wide-open marketplace, which is surrounded on all sides by buildings rich with history. The square has been at the centre of life in Huntingdon for the best part of 1,000 years, but today it's dominated by one gorgeous building that opened its doors a little under 300 years ago, the Town Hall here. Built in 1745, this majestic Georgian-era town hall was built to serve as the headquarters for the town, and once upon a time county council, complete with elegant meeting chambers and courtrooms inside, which remain well preserved to this day. But even at nearly 300 years old, Huntingdon's Town Hall is actually rather young in the context of this historic marketplace, where local traders have actually been buying and selling goods of all kinds for more than 800 years. At the centre of the market square there now stands this reflective war memorial, known as the Thinking Soldier, and it's around this statue, and all along the town's high street, that traditional markets are still held every week on Wednesdays and Saturdays. Now, as you could probably tell, we're not here on a Wednesday or a Saturday, and as such, the market square is rather tranquil, watched over, on this side, by Huntingdon's beautiful parish church. All Saints' Church was founded more than 1,000 years ago in the year 973 AD, but most of the building that we see now is actually just over 400 years old, mostly rebuilt in 1620. But just a few decades before then, it's thought that a major figure of British history stopped by here. Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed in 1587, and initially buried in Peterborough Cathedral, about 15 miles to the north of here. But in 1612, her body was ordered to be reburied in Westminster Abbey. And so, on the roughly 75-mile-long journey down south to London, a funeral cortege stopped overnight here at Huntingdon's parish church. This was a big event for the townspeople, and so everyone here came out to see the coffin pass through. Everyone, including one young local boy, by the name of Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell was just 13 years old when Mary's coffin rested overnight in Huntingdon, a brief encounter that would take on immense significance only decades later. But before we get into that part of Cromwell's life, just here beside Market Hill, we find the humble building where he went to school. Established in 1565, this was once upon a time the home of Huntingdon Grammar School, a school which actually still exists more than 450 years later. Admittedly, the school has since moved to larger premises on the edge of town, and so this original building has been converted to serve as Huntingdon's famous Cromwell Museum. When it comes to the history of Huntingdon, Oliver Cromwell's name is almost always the first that comes up in conversation, and this museum is the best place in town to discover the story of a man who dramatically shaped Britain's history. Inside you'll find relics from the hospital where he was baptised, exhibitions of valuable items that once belonged to Cromwell and his family, and even an original copy of Mrs. Cromwell's cookbook, a recipe guide of 1664 which includes pages on how to make gooseberry creams and pippin pie, alongside a few political essays that detail the downfalls of her husband's tenure as ruler of England. Standard cookbook fare then, Although the truth is that the book wasn't actually written by Cromwell's wife, Elizabeth. It was a made-up guide designed to poke fun at the couple, although the gooseberry creams weren't that bad actually. Indeed, the cookbook was published in 1664, 6 years after Oliver Cromwell's death in 1658, his life having been defined in particular by a violent conflict with a man who once stayed in this very hotel in Cromwell's hometown. In 1645, King Charles I stayed at the George Hotel here, but he wasn't a normal guest. He'd actually made this building his royal headquarters, after his armies had captured the town of Huntingdon during the English Civil War. This spacious hotel, a large coaching inn on the town's high street, was a convenient choice for the king and his court. But taking it over also served a symbolic purpose, in effect making a dig at Cromwell. The king, pictured on the hotel's front gates here, was more than likely aware that this building was once the home of Oliver Cromwell's grandfather, and it stood just a few doors along from the house where Cromwell himself was born, a house which no longer stands today. Charles's stay in Huntingdon was only brief though. The symbolic significance of capturing Cromwell's hometown in 1645 was one small victory in a lengthy conflict that the king eventually lost. He was executed in London in 1649, an execution at which Cromwell himself was present. The conflict between King Charles and Oliver Cromwell in the 1640s was an immense civil war that engulfed not just England, but Wales, Scotland and Ireland too. Yet the town of Huntingdon here was almost a microcosm for the whole conflict. It was controlled by both royalists and parliamentarians at different points, and was of course the place where a young Oliver Cromwell had likely seen the body of Mary Queen of Scots, the grandmother of the king who he would go on to put to death. The shadow cast by the English Civil War and Cromwell himself looms large over Huntingdon. In fact, wherever you find yourself in this captivating market town, there's some Civil War history to be uncovered, including here on Market Hill, where there stands a historic pub seemingly hidden away behind this archway. The Falcon is thought to have began life in the 16th century, but in the mid-17th century, the time of the English Civil War, it's reputed to have been used by Oliver Cromwell as his own local headquarters, from which he began recruiting men from around eastern England for a new army, to be known as the New Model Army. Renowned for its radical religious and political fervour, the New Model Army was a key feature in Cromwell's path to victory in the Civil War, and it was largely made up of men from the region surrounding Huntingdon. In fact, if we take a look at a map, we can see this town's location in England, just under 20 miles away from the city of Cambridge, and surrounded by the counties of Northamptonshire, Cambridgeshire, Norfolk, and Suffolk, home to some of the staunchest support for Cromwell and the parliamentarians' cause during the English Civil War. Indeed, as we spy the Market Inn, a 400-year-old pub standing here just behind the town hall, the town of Huntingdon was a central figure in the parliamentarian war effort, but not just because it was Cromwell's hometown. Historically, this town was at the very centre of its own county. Today, Huntingdon is very much part of Cambridgeshire, but for much of history, this was the county town of Huntingdonshire, a small English county with an unusual history. The county of Huntingdonshire can trace its origins back around 1,000 years, to the late Anglo-Saxon era, and in its early years it was a regular battleground between early English kings and marauding Danish armies from Scandinavia. But it was clear that Huntingdonshire, despite being the third smallest county in England, was a place of great importance. Around the time of the Domesday Book in the late 11th century, Huntingdon, the county town here, was one of England's most populated towns, situated along the path of perhaps the country's most important road. As we emerge from All Saints' Passage, we find ourselves on Huntingdon High Street, without doubt the most important street in this town's history, without which Huntingdon could never have gained the significance it did. Now, the modern chains and post-war buildings of this pedestrianised shopping street may not immediately speak to its genuinely rich heritage, But the truth is that Huntingdon's High Street has been in use for as many as 2,000 years, dating all the way back to the Roman era. Back then, this street was part of a route known as Ermine Street, a major Roman road that linked London with the important settlements at Lincoln and York, and as such it saw regular traffic and passing trade. Huntingdon itself wasn't a major site of Roman settlement, but even after the Romans left Britain, Ermine Street remained in use. And after having been caught up in the wars between Anglo-Saxons and the Danes, Huntingdon here was able to establish itself as an important stop on the route, which came to be known as the Great North Road. For centuries, people journeying along the Great North Road would travel through Huntingdon, passing by local landmarks like the Grand Commemoration Hall here, which was opened on the town's high street in 1842 as a scientific and literary institute, but which now serves as Huntingdon's central arts and entertainment venue. Of course, Victorian-era travellers making a lengthy trip on the road linking London and Edinburgh weren't especially likely to stop off for a spot of science and literature. They were much more likely to get out of their carriages in Huntingdon and head straight for the pub. And this town's high street has long been a great place to get a drink. Today there are no less than 5 separate pubs along the length of Huntingdon's high street. It was 6, although as we can see today, Cromwell's Pub here currently has its doors closed. But once upon a time the taverns of Huntingdon's main road were big business in town. Through time, the Great North Road became ever busier with traffic, and back in a period when a journey from London to the north of England, or even Scotland, would have taken multiple days, this town was perfectly positioned to give people a place to rest at the end of a long day of travel. Huntingdon lies around 60 miles by road from London, about the distance a stagecoach could comfortably make in one day. And as such, there were plenty of places here offering overnight shelter to those passing through. The George Hotel, where Charles I briefly had his headquarters, being the largest of the town's so-called coaching inns. Nowadays, the main road heading north bypasses the town of Huntingdon entirely, but people still come to visit this town for its rich history. Just here, for instance, we find another of Huntingdon's beautiful medieval churches. This is St Mary's Church, and similar to All Saints on Market Hill, it has a history dating back around 1,000 years to the late Anglo-Saxon era. But in its current form, it also dates from a rebuild of the early 17th century. In fact, the original medieval church collapsed back in 1609. Now, as far as that original church is concerned, it's believed that it served as a place of worship beside a local monastery, a priory which was founded around the year 1109. For that reason, some have even called St Mary's the Mother Church of Huntingdon, or even Huntingdon's own cathedral. And indeed, as the town was well populated and a county town at the time, it wouldn't have been unusual for such a significant place of worship to have been founded here. Sadly, little more is known of the early years of St Mary's Church, but across the road from it here, there stands a rather more recent and rather splendid Georgian-era house. This is Castle Hill House, a beautiful townhouse dating back to 1786, that takes its name from the fact that its grounds once spread all the way to the ruins of Huntingdon Castle, which we'll be visiting ourselves later on. But in more recent years, this house became best known for its use during the Second World War. Between 1943 and 1945, this was the national headquarters of the RAF's Pathfinder Force, an important arm of Britain's Air Force during the war. The Pathfinders were squadrons of planes which would fly over bombing targets in enemy territory, and drop flares down to the ground, in order to help bombers, who followed closely behind, make a more accurate hit on their targets. The house where the Pathfinder Force was headquartered is one of a number of historic buildings in central Huntingdon which have been preserved and repurposed for many different uses through time. While just along the street here we find a pub which only just reopened its doors in 2023, the Samuel Pepys, which is named after another famous figure associated with Huntingdon. Oliver Cromwell may be the first name that comes to mind when we think of this town, But Samuel Pepys, the famous diarist, well known for his first-hand account of the Great Fire of London, also went to school here in Huntingdon. In fact, for a brief period in the 1640s, while the English Civil War was raging, Pepys studied inside the very same grammar school as Oliver Cromwell. Standing opposite the town's modern Methodist church here, the pub bearing Pepys' name is another reminder of how this one town has found itself among the pages of plenty of nationally significant stories, both centuries ago and in recent decades. Back in 1628, Oliver Cromwell became the Member of Parliament for Huntingdon. It was his first role in national politics, and an early stepping stone on his way to eventually ruling the whole nation. But interestingly, Cromwell isn't the only Huntingdon MP who went on to lead the country. In fact, between 1979 and 2001, the town's Member of Parliament was none other than John Major, who for nearly 8 years, in the 1990s, was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Many more famous names have walked along Huntingdon's High Street, the end of which we've reached here. And across the road from us there stands a rather eye-catching hotel covered in ivy, the Old Bridge Hotel. It began life as another of Huntingdon's 18th century townhouses, but today it's one of this town's most pleasant inns, with a restaurant, hotel rooms and function facilities for events. And of course, the Old Bridge takes its name from the historic river crossing that stands just outside. The bridge here marks the edge of Huntingdon, as the town is bounded on its eastern side here by the River Great Ouse, which is the 5th longest river in the whole country. The Great Ouse flows for over 140 miles from the countryside southwest of Northampton, across England, and out into the North Sea near King's Lynn in North Norfolk. But it's around here that the river is at its most picturesque, wide and beautifully calm on this gorgeous summer's day. The main feature of the river as it flows past this town is of course the bridge, a gorgeous medieval river crossing that was actually built nearly 700 years ago in 1332, and which amazingly remains in largely the same shape all these centuries later. Now, once upon a time, this bridge was an important landmark, both for those crossing it as part of the Roman-era Ermine Street, but also for those on the river. In fact, for a period in the medieval era, Huntingdon here was the furthest inland port for boats carrying foreign trade along the Great Ouse, with the bridge serving as a barrier preventing travel any further. Today, beside the bridge, on the other side of the river, we can see a large old mill, a huge Victorian riverside structure where hosiery, trousers, stockings and such, was once produced. But that mill is not in Huntingdon. In fact, standing on the riverbank here, we find ourselves on the frontier between two separate towns, which for centuries have been arch rivals. The Great Ouse separates Huntingdon from the town of Godmanchester, a place that's about a quarter of the size of Huntingdon today, but which is home to its own lengthy history. The town across the river is thought to have once been the site of a Roman fort along the path of Ermine Street, and indeed its position on the historic road made it a place of great prosperity once upon a time. Long before Huntingdon became busy with its coaching inns by the Great North Road, Godmanchester was a major crossroads between cross-country paths, and was developed as an early inland port on the River Great Ouse. Indeed, for many years, Godmanchester was actually far more prosperous than its neighbour across the river here. But during other periods of history, Huntingdon has been the richer of the two towns. But very rarely have they both flourished at the same time. Situated so close together, Huntingdon and Godmanchester have often gained wealth or significance at the expense of one another, and the two towns have been known to quarrel on almost any matter, a truth which we can actually see in the construction of the old bridge here. The sticky out parts of the bridge here, called cutwaters, are pointed on this side of the bridge, but further along you might spot that they're actually much flatter. That's because when the bridge was being constructed 7 centuries ago, the builders on the Godmanchester side couldn't agree with those on the Huntingdon side here about what was the best design to direct the river's flow under the arches. And that wasn't the only sticking point. If you cycle or drive across the old bridge today, you might notice that it actually gets wider in the middle. That was a patch job, because when construction started, the two towns refused to agree exactly where their bridge should meet in the middle. Nowadays, the bridge serves as a clear reminder of Godmanchester and Huntingdon's centuries-old rivalry, which still features the odd jibe back and forth across the river, even to this day. But let's return our focus to the story of Huntingdon here. Because as we make our way around the Old Bridge Hotel, we're now going to make our way towards the remains of a great medieval castle, which once stood in this town. From its position on an important old Roman road, and the many battles fought over it between the Anglo-Saxons and the Danes, we know that Huntingdon has long been coveted for its strategic value. And so, for those who occupied it at any given time, defending this town was of the utmost importance. To achieve this, the Danes are thought to have built a small earthen fortress here just under 1200 years ago. But in the year 921 AD, about 1100 years ago, they were forced out by the Anglo-Saxon King Edward the Elder, who established a stronger grip on the town, which then quickly grew into one of medieval England's most populated and most prosperous. But 150 years later, England was invaded by the Normans under William the Conqueror, and in 1068 they built a new Motte and Bailey castle at a strategic site here close to the river, a spot in Huntingdon which is now known as Castle Hills. The castle was an important part in the defence of this town for centuries. It saw conflict all the way from the age of William the Conqueror to the time of Oliver Cromwell, used during the English Civil War. But today, nothing remains of the castle's once fiercely defended stone walls. Yet we can still see its outline. The grassy undulations in this park are not naturally occurring. They're actually the remains of medieval earthworks, on top of which the stone castle was built. Here we're walking in what was once upon a time the Castle Bailey, the main area of the fortress. And just in front of us we see a mound of earth known as the Motte, which would have been home to the castle keep, the most fiercely defended part of the castle, which watched over the Bailey and the rest of this town from up on high. After it was last used in battle during the English Civil War, Huntingdon Castle was left to ruin, and over time this site took on many different uses. A windmill once stood on top of the castle motte here, and of course this was once part of the grounds of Castle Hill House, which we saw earlier. Today this is simply a local park, but one well worth exploring once you know what you're looking at, the intriguing outline of a once great medieval castle. Sadly though, it's here in Huntingdon's Castle Hills that we've come to the end of our walk exploring this riveting town. A place perhaps most famous as the birthplace of one man, but which, as we've seen, is home to plenty more stories. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. And as we take one last look over the earthen remains of the castle, I hope you're looking forward to making your own trip to Huntingdon sometime soon.